Welcome everyone to this month's Exploring Quality in Family Childcare, How Large Motor Play Supports Executive Function. We are very excited to have Gretchen Becker-Crabb come back and speak about this important topic. So I will turn it over to Gretchen.
Thank you so much, Grace. And thank you so much to everybody here. Such a pleasure to be back and so looking forward to this hour together. Again, for those of you who don't know me, I am Gretchen Becker-Crabb. I am an occupational therapist, a licensed professional mental health counselor, a certified lactation counselor, and infant mental health endorsed mentor clinical. All of that to say, my roots are in early childhood. I was a infant teacher for a while before I became an occupational therapist. I work here in Madison, Wisconsin, and I own my own private practice. But I also do infant and early childhood mental health consultation for the UW preschools down here, as well as for Reach Dane. So I have a lot of experience when it comes to working with in early childhood classrooms. I'm also a mom of 3 boys who are in home childcare, so you all hold a very special place in my heart. Again, thank you so much for being here today. As we get started, I know that likely all of you have had a morning. I know here in Madison it's been a little rainy, so if you've been stuck inside like we have, I'd like to invite you to just a mindful moment. But this mindful moment is going to involve some of your motor skills. So we're gonna do a 2-for-1 here. What I'd like to invite you to do is just put your feet on the floor, find a soft gaze or close your eyes, and just take a deep breath in and exhale. And one more. Take a deep breath in and exhale. And then I'm going to show you a video here. And what I'd like you to do is just follow along with the video. You'll need both of your hands to do this, and it takes about 2 minutes. Here we go. Okay, let's take one more deep breath in and exhale. So, not your typical necessarily mindful moment where we're zenning out, right? But hopefully, what this did was it gave your brain an opportunity to reset. So, some of you might have found this like organizing and like, okay, I got this, I got the rhythm. Some of you may have found it frustrating. That's okay. Part of the intention here is to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be building motor skills. We're going to be thinking about things that we can do as providers, but also that our children can do that use both sides of our bodies and both sides of our brain in order to help support executive functioning. I guarantee you that if you found this a little bit mildly frustrating as you did it the first time, try it again and keep doing it. And the more that you do it, the more it becomes synced in your brain, and the more relaxing it can become. So, our objectives today are to identify gross motor skill development from ages from birth to 5. Likely that's going to be a review for most of you. I'm going to try to put a little spin on it. Um, the second objective is to understand the association between gross motor skills and executive functioning, regulation, and social skills. And then my third objective is that I hope that you walk away with at least 4, hopefully more, strategies that you can use immediately after the kids wake up from nap to help support executive function and gross motor learning. So let's go a little bit into gross motor development. One of the things that I would like to encourage you all to think about is when we think about gross motor skills, we're thinking about quality versus quantity. I think that especially here in the United States, there's a lot of emphasis placed on our children's ability to be able to meet gross motor milestones very quickly. For the most part, it is very celebrated if your child is walking by 8 months, let's say. Um, However, I think about that in a slightly different way. I would much rather see a child gain their motor skills in a sequenced, in a very defined pattern versus having it go quick and having the missteps. For instance, I would much rather see a child who's walking at 18 months who has done all of the other motor skills to get to that point, like crawling and standing independently and making transitions from standing before they get to walking. So I would really encourage you, we're going to talk a lot about that today, but hopefully by the end of the hour, you'll see really how important that quality is versus the quantity. Now, there's always, if children get stuck at stages, if you have like, let's say a 10-month-old who is still struggling with sitting, that can be outside of the expected time that we would expect some of those things to happen, but just know that development is very flexible. Um, Most of us have birth to 3 organizations in our counties. Those are really great people to reach out to if you do have concerns about the quality of the child's motor control. Gross motor development also happens within patterns. So, motor development after birth starts at the head and proceeds to the feet. So, what do I mean by that? If you have an infant, and you can think about this infant laying flat on their bellies, the first thing that an infant will start to do is lift their head, right? They might be doing some kicking and they might have, they might be doing some movement. Hopefully, they are out of their other extremities. But really, it starts with their head. They're lifting their head. Then they might go to their shoulders, maybe start propping up and prone and looking around. Then they start sitting, right? Then kneeling, then standing. So you see that development happens from head to toe. If we see things like a baby who always wants to like scooch, like they do that butt scoot thing with their butts, um, and but really what they're supposed to be working on at that stage would be like lifting their heads, then we start to wonder about the quality of that child's movement, right? Because it's not necessarily following that head to toe trajectory. We're going to talk more about that. Gross motor patterns also start from the middle of the body and extend out to the extremities. So our mouths, our hands, our feet, all of those types of activities that we do in those areas of our body come and start from our trunk, from our neck to like our thighs. And so if we think about development too, babies first they kind of have to start to figure out where their bodies are and how to sit upright before they're really able to use their hands in sitting, for instance. So it starts at the middle, extends out to the extremities. Gross motor patterns work with primitive reflexes. So primitive reflexes are automatic things our bodies do from birth that are a result of sensory input. So for example, if you stroke the side of a baby's cheek, they usually turn in that direction. That's called the rooting reflex. They do that in part to help orient to feeding. They also do that to orient socially to their parents, or whoever may be holding them. And it's the beginning of head and neck control in association with your body. It does all of these amazing things, and that's just one out of the 28 primitive reflexes that we have. So gross motor patterns work within that. And then this, for our purposes today, these are going to be the things that you're going to want to remember is that gross motor patterns increase in complexity in different planes of movement. So the most simplistic ways that we can move are front to back, right? Or flexion and extension, left to right. So body shifting from one side to the other, using the same side of the body. So using your right arm and your right leg at the same time in the same manner, or using the left at the same time in the same manner, using both hands together, using alternating sides of our body and rotation. So think about that like crawling would be a great example of that. One side of the right arm is doing something different than the left leg is doing. And you have a little bit of that trunk rotation happening simultaneously. And then finally, we look at crossing the midline. This is one of my favorite infant development things to look for. Um, and it's something that I always like to, this and transferring from one hand to another, which they don't really put in the baby books, but are like the coolest things I think to witness as a provider and as a therapist, a child is able to take something from in one hand or one leg and put it on the opposite side of your body. In order to do that, it's important to remember that your right side of your brain controls your left side of your body, and your left part of your brain controls the right side of your body. So when you're able to cross the midline in that way, it means that both sides of your brain are working at the same time and in a coordinated manner. So these are some of the patterns that we look for when we're thinking about executive functioning as well. You're going to see this again, take note of it. You could cut it out and paste it on your wall somewhere to help you remember when you're working with children as well. So now I'm not going to death by PowerPoint you all, so don't worry about that. I did break down some of the birth to about 5 gross motor skills that I would like to just bring your attention to. I know that Grace will send you the PowerPoint after this meeting. So again, you can feel free to use this if you're feeling stuck, like, I don't know what else to do next for this child. This could be a very simplistic guide that you could use. But what I'd like you and what I'm going to point out is, again, that head to toe development as these skills come online and the complexity in the planes of movement as well. So again, we already talked a little bit about gross motor skills and development for an infant birth to 5 months. The infant is going to be lifting their head in prone, then pushing off their elbows, then pushing off their hands, rolling from their stomach to the back. At this stage, that roll can sometimes be a little bit more reflexive and accidental, at least at about 3 to 4 months yet. Or, well, it starts shifting, I should say, at 3 to 4 months. But what a baby might do is turn their head too quickly, or if they're pushed, if they extend off of their arms in prone and they turn their heads, they usually like fall over, and we're all like, woo, they rolled, right? But that tends to be a little bit more reflexive before 3 months of age. We start to notice that babies will start to roll more segmentally from their stomachs to their back. And what I mean by that, by about 5 months, is that they start to initiate that more from their hips and not so much from their head. Bringing hands to midline, and then they begin that supported sitting. So I hope that you can see here how it starts from that head to sit, even in this 5-month period. At 6 to 9 months, babies start sitting more independently, right? They are, again, pretty proficiently, hopefully, doing some of that segmental rolling. We start to see army crawling. So again, army crawling is that alternating sides of the body. And when I talk about army crawling, I mean when they're on their bellies and they're prone and they're kind of still low on the ground while they crawl. And with that usually comes rotation and sitting. So a baby's able to sit, but then they're also able to rotate and not fall over as they do that. So again, do you see that how those planes of movement start even in sitting patterns where a baby could be sitting and feel stable? They might like like kind of like play with that flexion extension. And sometimes I'm sure you've all seen this where they like tilt their heads back too far and they fall back and they can't catch themselves yet, or they do the same thing when they fall forward. By about the 9-10-ish month phase, we're hopeful that they are able to work in some of these different planes of movement and maintain that position upright independently. And then again, you should be able to start seeing consistent crossing the midline in that seated position, or while they're creeping on the floor at the midline as well. The thing I want to point out between 9 and 12 months, again, as I said before, it's not so much if a baby can walk really quickly. Actually, it's the quality of how they got to walking that matters. These are all the little steps in between that you would notice to get to walking. So they might start in low supported kneeling, then they pop up to high kneeling. Then they might take one leg and bring that one leg up and do like a half kneel while they're supported, then stand supported, then maybe start to cruise, then stand independently, and then start to walk. So all of these, and you'll see why this is related to executive functioning in a moment, but these pauses and these skill development areas are really important to promote with all of our babies who are taking that next developmental step after supported sitting and transitions between supported sitting and prone and the walking stage. They start to creep now. So creeping is like that traditional crawling, right? 4-point pattern. They're up on their knees and their hands, and they're alternating sides of their body. Walking, again, it takes its own form as well. So it's not just walking, but after they learn to walk, they may start by holding with one hand. They may put their hands in this high regard position as they're starting to balance and walk. Then they're able to carry one large object and start to push and pull objects as they walk. And then they start to crawl, right? Or crawl upstairs or furniture. All of these little tiny adjustments make a difference in their quality of their movement. Then we start seeing them be able to really refine some of those asymmetrical skills and their balance skills and their ability to be able to cross the midline. And it starts to become more of a cognitive milestone as well. They learn how to kick a ball or walk with assistance upstairs or run. Usually it's like a little like their running is a little bit stiff yet at that phase. And then at 3 years, we are looking for tiptoes, like reaching up for that cookie jar, that they're able to do that, or throwing a ball overhand while standing, maneuvering basic playground equipment. And then finally, at 3 to 5 years, we're hoping that they can pedal a tricycle. So can you imagine like how difficult it is and how many things they have to be thinking about in order to pedal a tricycle? It has to be asymmetrical. It's balance. It is bilateral coordination. It's rotation. It's all of those things that I broke down for you in one activity. Climbing ladders and more complex equipment, kicking with accuracy, skipping, and even at this stage starting to get to more complex games and like baseball or kickball or things like that. Okay, so that was our quick review on motor skills. It'll all come back to you in a moment, I promise. But now we're going to just do a quick shift to executive functioning. So I'm going to have you just watch this little like 2-minute video from the Center of Developing Minds at Harvard to give you an example of what executive functioning is.
Science tells us that minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors.
We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Just look at your shapes. What should you have done next? Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this?
A toolbox.
A toolbox.
What is executive function?
Safety goggles.
Safety goggles. Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on. A child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn.
Cube.
But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function?
Okay, so we're going to move on from this video. I hope that video gave you some examples of, and that you were able to relate. I know just watching that, I could relate that video to many of the classrooms that I've been in, to what we expect from children and how that changes throughout their developmental trajectory. Again, executive functioning helps us with attention and focus. It's working memory. So remembering the sequence of how to do things, remembering steps. As you can imagine, children, especially in these phases of development, if we think even to like Piaget's work, development at this stage, at these early steps, at these early stages in life, really start with the sensory system. It starts with sensory and motor development. So the way that we get to executive functioning first and foremost is through motor skills. So this becomes really important to, even if you have let's say a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old who's really struggling with executive functioning, to start with their motor system and to start at the beginning makes a lot of sense for these children. Inhibitory control is in the video, they gave the example of sharing. I think about this too as their ability to be able to stop and start something at an appropriate time, or that they have really well sequenced timing abilities. Cognitive flexibility, it's adjusting movement patterns, it's adjusting your thinking, it's thinking about the 5 different ways to play with a stick, right? It's not just one way to do something. All of these pieces and components make up executive functioning that is rooted in motor development. I'm also just going to highlight here something that we use in the occupational therapy world, and when we think about sensory integration, is an idea known as praxis, which is part of executive functioning. And that is our ability to get an idea about something, like I'm going to pick up this cup, let's say. How I'm going to do that? Am I going to pick up this cup with my hand, with my teeth, with my toes? How am I going to do that? And then to finally physically execute that task. So So executive functioning is kind of what you may see on the outside. Praxis is kind of are the pieces that happen as leading up to executive functioning. If there's one or more areas of sensory processing that are impacted, praxis is also impacted as well. Just to give you more information around exactly how this works is that this is a picture of our beautiful brain. And if you can see here in white is the somatosensory cortex next to the primary motor cortex in purple. Underneath that is the primary auditory cortex. So like hearing, speech, and language, Broca's and Wernicke's areas, those all, if you look kind of at the intersection where all those three things come together, that is part of the vestibular cortex. And the vestibular cortex is the basis of our motor skills. It's figuring out where we are in space and how we're moving our head, how fast we're going in space. And so when we activate the vestibular system, when we activate the motor system, we activate all of these other areas. So this is why kids on a playground are never quiet, because when they're moving, they're activating their auditory and their speech centers as well. So it all works together. Even though we're talking about motor, just know that all of our senses and all of our cognitive thinking, it all interplays together. This is just as a little reminder, all of the senses that we have in movement works with every single one of our senses as well. As you can see in this picture, so the coordination of vestibular, auditory, visual, and somatosensory input are the basis of how we move our bodies. These types of activities and motor types of activities help to promote smooth and effective reflexes and movement. It also aids in head and neck development that lead to coordination of hand and eyes. So when we think about our ability to be able to hold our heads still in midline, and our bodies, our postural control is working for us, then we can see things effectively. We can use our eyes really well. We can use our hands to cut or to trace. But if you can imagine, if you even like slouch in your chair and you try to write something, it makes it more difficult to do so. That's because of that system that all works together. Postural control, we've talked about that before, is impacted by all of these areas of sensory processing, and the rest of our motor coordination is based off of our postural control. And then all of these things working together help us with anticipatory movement. So this child playing hopscotch, this child has to feel where their body is in space. They have to know that one leg has to lift while the other has to stay on the ground. They have to be able to look forward to see what's going to happen in the future. Where am I going to put my next step? They have to feel where their foot isn't coming in contact with the ground. They need to be able to process and do all of these things simply to take a skip ahead. So as you can imagine, if one of these areas of sensory processing aren't working effectively, doing something like a hopscotch is going to be very difficult. Planning the hopscotch, remembering the sequence of how to do it is going to come secondary to anything that relates to how do I move my body in space first and foremost. Bilateral integration is a really important part of our motor skill development. And anything that you can do with kids that involves work on both sides of the body working together will help to promote executive functioning. There is a concept that is known as rhythmicity. And what rhythmicity does is when we see somebody doing something rhythmical, like whether it's clapping or it's dancing or or for me, it happens when I'm at Target behind a parent who's holding an infant and they start to sway, like, right? and I find myself standing in line starting to sway as well. That is rhythmicity through bilateral integration. And so anything that we can do to really promote using both sides of the body in play and in daily living activities can be something that can help with our executive functioning. The other reason for that, as I'd mentioned before, is that one side of our brain controls the opposite side of the body. So whenever we're using two hands, we're activating both sides of the brain, which is helping with all of those executive functioning skills that we had talked about. We are at our best to be able to remember and to demonstrate inhibitory control and to think about cognitive flexibility when we have both sides of our body moving together in an efficient manner. This also aids in regulation. So when we can coordinate one side of our brain to the other and they're working in synchrony, it helps with co-regulation and regulation of the individual. It is our ability to be able to perform tasks to the best of our ability, and we need regulation in order to feel comfortable to explore and feel safe. Before children will do anything or take any sort of cognitive or social or physical, air quotes, risk, right? Like, or growth and development, they need to feel safe. Our bodies are going to protect ourselves first and foremost. And so to work from a regulated place is what helps us to develop those more complex thought processes and executive functioning. This for most children starts in motor. They learn to regulate their bodies before they learn how to regulate and co-regulate with other people or children. And they need help to do that. Actually, individual, independent regulation, though I would argue that none of us truly have the ability to self-regulate 100% of the time, are to expect a child to regulate independently, meaning that I'm feeling like I'm stressed out and I need to chew some gum in order to help me feel organized, doesn't happen until that child is at a minimum of 8 years old. And that, I think, is still pretty early. Social emotional skills come out of our motor development. Our ability to understand ourselves and others. We have to first understand ourselves, right? We have to first be able to figure out, this is how I sit upright. This is how I move my body through space when I'm walking, before we're really able to engage in higher level play or higher level motor skills with another person. Like even in this picture, to be able to hold hands with another person and run and walk and explore and play means that I have to feel comfortable in my own body first and foremost. So by helping children to develop their motor skills, we're helping them also to develop their social skills as well. Again, that rhythm of relationships is developed as their motor skills start to develop, and they don't have to think so much about how do I stand and unweight one part of my body to reach out for this thing or to reach for the hand of another person without falling over. They have to be able to have those skills before they're able to coordinate with another person. This also extends to flexibility in sharing in ideas and objects, when we can watch and we can learn from others and imitate those motor skills as well. So as you can imagine, a child with executive functioning challenges might demonstrate different difficulties with some of their learning in a home setting. They might be easily frustrated, struggle with impulse control. So they're reaching for their neighbor's milk before theirs is poured. They may rely on watching other children. They tend to be more followers. This is actually quite an adaptive skill, though, I would argue. But they learn by watching other people. But it also means that if you ask them to do anything independently or they're the first in line, they're usually also the first to have a meltdown. They might have difficulty following instructions. And these instructions, it can be really frustrating, I think, for us as providers sometimes, because it can be things that we do every day. They could be familiar. They could be multi-step. So it could be You know, something like putting the dishes away after mealtime. You know that they've seen it a zillion times. You know, you've walked through it with them a zillion times. But if they're struggling with just kind of keeping their bodies upright, they're going to have difficulty following these instructions because, again, they're going to be protecting themselves and not able to quite process all of the things that you're asking them to do. They might seem forgetful, struggle with task initiation, get stuck on one way of doing something or activity. I bet you that you can imagine this. If I can only move my body in one direction, if I can only flex or extend and feel comfortable in that way, and I have like minimal body rotation and that doesn't feel so comfortable for me, I'm going to climb up that slide the same way every single time. And if anybody runs in front of me or changes that pattern at all, I'm going to have a meltdown and get really frustrated because I'm not going to feel safe in my body. Being distracted by other sensory information, they're going to have some difficulty filtering. So if you tell them to do something and then they're on their way to do it, but you tell them another instruction, they're going to get frustrated with that or completely miss that cue sometimes. They may struggle, as we talked about, with transitions, have difficulty sharing beyond the expected age that we would obviously expect sharing to be difficult for children, and struggle to communicate play ideas verbally or non-verbally with peers. So much of what we do socially is not done from what we say. It's more from what we do and how our bodies are present with other people. So as you can see, I hope that you can see more and more that the motor skills impact our ability to be able to follow through with some of these executive functioning skills, which lead to difficulties with regulation or social interaction as well, or learning. Okay, so let's play with this a little bit. Before we get too much into strategies, we're going to take a breath and try something and try a little experiment for yourselves. And that is I'm going to have you take one arm and just kind of pedal it forward, so to speak. Okay, and see how that feels. Notice what you notice. And then I'm going to have you pause and take the other hand and go backward and do the same thing. You might have one hand that's more coordinated than the other. And now I have to pause and think about that. Now I want you to do both at the same time. So one hand goes forward and the other hand goes backwards. Okay, and then pause and stop and do the opposite. Okay, take a breath. Breathe in. Exhale. And notice what you notice. Do you feel any different before or after we just did that? Hopefully what that does is it resets your attention a little bit to transition onto our next activity. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, now that you have the basics around what is all of this, how does motor skill develop, how does it integrate with executive functioning, we're going to talk about how to bring these into your homes and into your work with children. The first thing that I would love to recommend to you is to think about your environment. So thinking about opportunities for children to learn their motor skills in a cooperative way, like circle time or outside time where everybody's running around. But I also think that it's important to have spaces where children can learn and experiment with their motor skills on an individual level as well. So this might be something as simple as having a balance beam in a corner, or stepping stones in a corner, or the nugget system that is in a certain area of your classroom that children can kind of have the opportunity to practice on their own. I know personally that I'm somebody who likes to watch other people to do something before I actually do it. And it's difficult for me to practice some of my new motor skills in a situation where I think that everybody might be watching me. So to give children the opportunity to be able to do a little bit of independent and group exploration is really helpful. Dynamic and different challenges. So we want to think about other, like, really thoughtful and creative ways that you can change up your environment. And that could be as simple as putting a big crash pad on the floor that kids can climb over, climb underneath, or look around. We're going to talk a little bit more about obstacle courses, things that you can do to change your environment. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Sometimes it can just be simply going outside and climbing on rocks. Just making sure that you make it dynamic and you're mixing it up for children. And then obviously incorporating the natural environment. Anytime we can get outside is the research around nature-based learning is so positive for sensory growth and motor development. Taking learning outside as often as you can be a helpful tool to think about. Again, here's our slide again around gross motor patterns. So as we get into some of these strategies, you're going to notice that we're going to be building on some of those motor skills with some of these different complexities of movement in planes and thinking about head to foot development at the same time. So this is just here as your reminder. Okay, so when we think about babies, so I call these kiddos the hello world category. And these kiddos would be babies to just learning how to creep and crawl. To work on their working memory at this point is going to look like postural control and adjustments. So let's consider for a moment a baby who is playing in tummy time, let's say. They're going to be learning how to lift their heads and how to come up on their arms, their forearms and their hands and not fall over. They're going to be working in that flexion and extension type of manner. And once they get that down, once they have a good idea of what do I need to do, what postural control and adjustments do I have to make in order to do that, they're going to start to push up and maybe start looking around, right? Or they might try to unweight one hand and usually they fall over, but they remember what happened and they learn how to make those subtle adjustments in this phase. This is also why tummy time is so important for children. Doesn't just have to be done on the ground, can be done over laps or while you're holding them in your arms and in the air. The inhibitory control at this stage is again done very much in tummy time and also with motor regulation. So one of my favorite things to do for inhibitory control would be to, let's say you have a child who's sitting, still needs support, and they're sitting on your lap. You might bounce them a little bit. That challenges that postural control. It also challenges their ability to be able to think about how they adjust their body. But if you bounce them consistently and then you stop, they have to figure out what to do with their bodies then in order to readjust and get that activity going again. So I might see them kick their feet. That to me indicates they might want a little bit more. So then I might start bouncing them on my leg again and then pause. So that those motor adjustments, tummy time, inhibitory control, learning how to work through some of these more challenging, I would argue, adjustments and postural control is really the job of a baby at this phase. So when they're moving and working dynamically through those phases of tummy time, this is really where they develop their working memory and some of that inhibitory control. At this stage in cognitive flexibility, then what we start to notice is even in tummy time or in sitting, or as they start to roll, they start to have more, some of that directed movement starts to happen where they see their parent from across the room and they start to roll to them. Or they see that familiar toy in tummy time just out of reach and they might unweight one hand to try to reach for it. They also may demonstrate some very simple cause and effect play at this stage too. So I take the rattle and I hear the rattle when I move my hand, and then when my hand stops, the rattle stops. But if I move it again, I hear that sound again. They start to connect that cause and effect in very simple play within all of these different motor patterns. these activities usually are not only just done in tummy time and sitting and whatnot, but also through daily living activities. So like I think about diaper changes, and when babies know what to expect for diaper changes, then they start adapting their motor patterns to that. Like they might start to lift their legs eventually, or they might start to bring even their hands to midline when they realize what's starting to happen and you're in the process of diaper changes. That is also how they start to work on some of that motor memory through their motor skills. The next phase is our watch out world. These are our crawlers to our walkers. And how we work on working memory through motor skills at this point is setting up more complex ways for children to be able to crawl to or to move to their favorite people and their toys. They already have an idea of how to do that in rolling. Now they have to figure out how to do that when they're crawling and they're not as effective in walking. So that is like, that may be setting up different toys on a couch, let's say, for them to reach every time that they start to walk. So we're adding in some of that left to right movement with some increasing complexity and memory. You know how to maybe start moving from one side of the couch to the other. Now can you do that and pick up your toy and play with it and still maintain your postural control and your balance, and then continue to move from there? Inhibitory control at this phase looks like playing with angles and playing with more dynamic movement challenges. So again, I mentioned the nugget before. Those are those like couches that, it makes a couch, but really they're like inclined triangles, and some of them are like bolsters or even just simply couch cushions that babies can start to learn to crawl over and realize, whoop, if I crawl too fast, I'm going to fall over. And they crawl, 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 and then they have to kind of pause at the edge. If any of you have those, like the steps in your classroom with the ramps, and then it has the mini loft on the top, this is a perfect activity for that. So putting a toy even at the bottom of the slide where the baby has to climb down, pause, pick up the toy before they move on, or crawl over the obstacle at the end of the slide. Those are all things that they can do to help to develop their working memory at this stage. Or sorry, inhibitory control, probably a little working memory as well. Their cognitive flexibility is also demonstrated through these dynamic surfaces and increased visual environments. So as a baby is more proficient, let's say in crawling, and they see that that toy on the other side of the room that they're really aiming for, then we're going to put some things in their way to make it a little bit more challenging, like put the pillow in between them and their preferred toy, and see if they can work around it, or hide the toy just behind like a chair or something like that, where they can see part of it, but they can't see all of it. And their ability to be able to navigate to get to that toy through the environment is where they start to learn some of that cognitive flexibility. Holding on and manipulating objects while standing or engaging in crawling activities. So they're holding on to a tool that they might use in order to help with something that's across the room. You'll see an example of that in a moment. Or simply holding on to objects while they're walking. This would involve, again, this could potentially involve holding two hands in the midline, which could also lead to rotation if they drop it, or even encouraging them to pick up the ball that's more to the side of them, encourages that rotation, using two hands to stand and come back to the midline. These are obviously things you would do once a child is proficient in walking, but it helps them to kind of to use some of those higher level stages to work through some of that cognitive flexibility. There's 10 bazillion different ways I can pick up a ball. Now I have to figure out how to move my body in order to do that. And more advanced cause and effect happen in this stage as well. So I'm going to show you an example of this. This was a video that was made by by our nanny for my son after he turned 6. And this is just an example of how you might set up a more complex visual environment and with tool use in order to promote some of that cognitive flexibility and inhibition. Part of the reason why she gave him a rattle in this moment was so that she could stack the blocks, because she knew that when she showed him that she was stacking, that he would always go for it. So this is an example of, I'm going to give you something to help you with that inhibitory control at the midline where you're using 2 hands, and then I'm going to give you something to work toward. Okay, let me show you this. Again, so simple, but some of the most simplistic things are actually the most complex. So when you watch him go through this again, you'll see him crawling with the tool. And eventually at some point he decides that the tool is too much for him and it's too overloading to get to the thing that he wants. And that's why he ditches it and then goes to, and also it's the hand that he knocks it over with as well. So he has a plan in his head of how he's going to do this. I would, if I were playing with him in this moment, you could shorten the distance so that he could potentially crawl and then knock it over with that rattle as well, right? So I'm going to show you it one more time, but you can see how he's using alternating sides of his body to do this, and then has the goal directed of knocking it over. In this example, he really wants to be able to stand, but he also wants to be able to hold on to that football too. And he uses his cognitive flexibility as well as his postural control to hold on to that football in his mouth. When we use our mouths, we help our body as well. So he brilliantly, and if I do say so myself, he is my son, but like when he does that, he is able to do the task that he wanted to. He's using that cognitive flexibility. He used that inhibitory control in that moment where he paused and he was like, I need to use both hands. How am I going to do this? And he put the football in his mouth so that he could do both at the same time. And then finally, we have world explorers. So these are like our 3 to 5-year-olds. And now they really have some of those basic motor skills down, the walking, hopefully. They're starting to run. They're starting to explore more in creative ways. But then the cognitive and the social part become more of the equation. So now they're maybe doing more complex obstacle courses where there's lots of different balance challenges and there's lots of ways to move through that with rotation, with alternating sides of the body. Familiar dances with movement. We'll maybe try a little bit of that in a moment. That helps with that memory, that sequencing, but then you change it up a little bit. So you might sing the same song and it might be the same movements, but we slow them down or we speed them up or we add a different cognitive challenge to it. That helps with to develop their working memory. Inhibitory control is done through balance activities. So rocker boards, balance beams, walking on curbs, or I think about walking across rocks on a pond. So in any of those activities, you're going to demonstrate your ability to be able to pause and think about, okay, this is unfamiliar to me. I have to figure out my balance and I have to take that next step. I can equate this for you all. If you think about if I put you all out on a lake and had you do some log rolling. Now, maybe some of you in this group have done log rolling in the past, but if you think about the first time, or if this is the first time you've ever log rolled, you're going to likely try to run across that log as fast as you can and not do any fancy things. You're going to be in that flexion, extension type of movement pattern, right? Because you're just going to be focused on your balance. As you become more proficient with that, I might ask you to pause in the middle and do a pirouette and then continue on your way. If you have that sense of balance and you have that sense of flexion extension where your body is in space, you're going to be able to add more to it. This is what happens with children when they're demonstrating inhibitory control through their gross motor patterns. They're going to be able to pause and say, I can't do this, or I can do this, or what are all of the dynamic ways that I can add to it. start stop types of activities. So like red light, green light is a perfect one for this. Or fast, slow types of movements. So can you balance a feather and move really slowly while you're still balancing that feather? And what happens if you try to run quickly? For children who struggle with sharing, for children who struggle with transitions, with inhibitory control types of motor activities are where it's at. Encouraging and practicing these in a really fun and dynamic way can really make a difference in their ability to be able to do some of these more complex things when it comes to social interactions. Then we see more of that cognitive flexibility coming out, game-based sports, social games like hand clapping types of games come into play here, or using musical instruments. Allow for movement and also differences in how you might attempt an activity. I have an example here. Again, this is my son as he's a little bit older and a friend of his. And what I'd like you to do is think about all of the things that we just talked about. Working memory, how you notice them relating to each other socially, with words, without words, and how do you see the sequencing and patterns coming out? How do you see some of that inhibitory control? How do they start and stop and re-engage? And how do they mix up the play? Okay. Okay, I'm going to pause there. So I hope that you saw in this video how something so simplistic, nobody is guiding them to do this, right? It's just play with musical instruments, how they beautifully mimicked each other, how one started singing and the other one matched the other's rate and pace and tone, how they both stopped to check in with each other and to figure out what they were going to do next without really using words at all. They would transition from that sit to stand and stand to sit. Nobody told them to do that. They simply followed each other and were in rhythm with each other as they did it. These are the opportunities that we hope to create for children. So if you as a provider can demonstrate, like, everybody do this together and then pound on your rattle or whatever it is, and follow the rhythm that I'm showing you, do you see how this leads to social interaction and ability to be able to stay and play? I hope that you can see that through this demonstration and through what we've talked about today. I can guarantee, both of these kids now are 14. They are excellent hockey players and are very well adjusted socially. So it does matter. And so to see that what happens in these early stages absolutely makes a difference for them in the long run. They're also very great academically. I will, any question, I know we're out of time here, so I would love to hear what you think, how you use this in your practice, questions that you might have. You can always reach out to me at any time. Email is always the best way to get a hold of me directly, but I'm on Instagram and Facebook, just baby brand new pages, so there's nothing super special on there yet. But if you would like to reach out to me and have more of a discussion, I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us today.